So you've run your tox study, now you have to figure out how to get that tox study into the clinic. The biggest thing about non-clinical studies are that the NOAELs and the AUCs and all the data that you get from that, the overall summary and what the study director establishes as those last data points, those last dose levels, that is what's used to go into the clinic. But how is that calculated, right? How do we go into the clinic and how do we use our tox studies to come up with a safe starting dose or the maximum recommended starting dose, or even something for a biologic, for example? Well, this tool, while it's not going to exactly explain it, that's in another video, this tool is a great tool that I'll have linked in the description that you can go to and use your doses from your tox studies, multiple species, multiple dose levels, multiple body weights, including a human body weight, and use that to calculate your human dose. And you can go do multiple species at a time and come up with your MRSD based on which species is the most sensitive. So let's take a look at this tool, right? As we go down on the left panel here are going to be all your options. So you have a calculation mode, you can include your animal study data, you can then export it to Excel or save it as a PDF, but once you put all your parameters in and you put all your inputs in, you're going to be able to spit out your starting dose on the right. So let's look at the different options that we have, right? So we have the MRSD, which is your non-oncology starting dose that uses your NOAEL, pretty straightforward. You have your SSD, which is your safe starting dose. This is used in oncology. For rodents, we use the STD-10, or the severely toxic dose in 10% of the animals. And we use the HNSTD for non-rodents, which is the highest non-severely toxic dose. The other one is an HEDE only, or your human equivalent dose. This has no safety factor application, just a quick conversion to see what your animal dose would be as a human. So this is where you pick which one. If you're running an oncology program, you'd pick SSD. If you're running a non-oncology program, you'd pick MRSD. So let's stick with MRSD for now. And then right below that, you can see your human reference weight. So a lot of times this fluctuates depending on what you're using to justify your starting dose. Most people use 70. You can change this to 60. 60 is another valid option as well. Then you can choose whichever one you think is best. Anything below 60 or over 70 is usually not recommended. And then right below that, you can see the FDA guidance that talks about all of this stuff, so you can get a little bit more in-depth understanding of it. So if we continue to go down, we'll stick to 60 for now. If you continue to go down, you can see you have your animal study data. And so this data is essentially your tox studies. Whatever tox studies you ran, your GLP tox, you can do this for your non-GLP, for your DRFs, if this is something you want to kind of see after your DRFs, what your exposure margins might be, what your safe starting dose is looking like before you run your GLP. Great for being able to translate non-clinical data to different teams, investors, your board, what have you. But ultimately, if we are picking this for a clinical trial for an FIH, you would pick which species you ran your GLP toxin, and then you'd fill in the parameters. So let's say that we ran a typical rat and dog study for a non-oncology compound. We could pick the rat, and we could pick the dog. And then within each of these are different parameters. So you can see your KMs, which are your conversion factors, and we'll talk about where those come from. But this is essentially using your NOAEL. You can pick each one that you want. Like we said above, your MRSD is based on your NOAEL, not your oncology ones. So we're going to stick with the NOAEL here. We're going to add the dose of your NOAEL. So in your rats, let's say your NOAEL was 150. And then we're going to add the weight for the rat. These come pre-populated, but based on the average rat weight for your study, you can update these. So for example, if you happen to have a study that you had obese rats, which sometimes happens, you can change the average KIGS for your rat. Or if you potentially use sexually mature dogs, those weights are going to be a little bit heavier. You can pick that. So you can update these if you want. Otherwise, keep them the way they are, and you'll be able to get your numbers calculated out like that. And then for the dog, same thing. You have your conversion factor, NOAEL. We'll say for the dog, our NOAEL was 20, and then we'll stick at 10 kgs about for the dog. This is usually between anywhere from 8 to 10 kgs. We'll say we had some chunky dogs. And so once you input these numbers in here, you can see over here on the right that your MRSD is calculated out. And this uses both the species that you had used in your GLP tox, and it tells you which one is this most sensitive species, or your driving species. And so your MRSD for a 60 kg human is going to be 65 mgs. That's based on the dog's NOAEL of 20 mgs per kg. with the NOAEL and the safety factor, and then that would also tell you your human equivalent dose before the safety factor in case you need that. And then it breaks it down into exactly what you did, what numbers were used, and how that calculation happened. So just some warning notes here at the bottom. A tox judgment note about the FDA's guidance in picking the most appropriate species, and then the BSA scaling. Sometimes it's not the most appropriate route for particular administrations, topical, nasal, subcutaneous, or things like that. You can adjust for that. And then if you're using biologics or large molecules, typically this is a combination of your NOAEL, your MABEL, and modeling approaches and computational modeling, and that usually has clinical pharmacology coming into the picture at that point and doing some complex things that are not within my wheelhouse. And then down at the bottom you can see the different guidances. You can pick them, you can click on them and learn a little bit more about them. And then if you want to know the conversion factors, the KM factors, this table brings it all down. So you can click on that, it opens up, and it gives you all the conversion factors and what you're actually doing. So you can get an understanding of the foundation of where these numbers came from, and then it gives you a couple quick examples. So let's go back up, and real quick I'm just going to show you what it looks like if you were going to do an oncology compound. So let's do a safe starting dose, an SSD. We're going to go, let's go to 70 kgs for the human, and we're going to say, let's say we did the rat and dog, we'll stick with that. We're going to go, it automatically clicks it down for you, so the rat is a STD-10, and the dog is a HNSTD. We're going to stay at 150, we're going to stay at 20, so everything's the same, just the difference is that we're doing an SSD. And so if we go back up, you're going to see now, the dog is still the driving species, but that dose, the human dose, is now 120 mgs versus the 65 mgs we had before. And actually, let me change this back to 60. You can see that it's still almost double. It's still a little bit more. And this is mostly because the safety factor is driving the greater human dose because there's more wiggle room in oncology. So typically your safety factor would be 10. In the dog, it's 6. So you're dividing it by a little bit less of a safety factor, which gives you a higher dose. If the rat was the most sensitive, you'd see the rat there too. And so this is what that looks like, and you can play around with it. You can actually model any sort of starting dose that you want, oncology, non-oncology, and you can add these, you can add whatever different animals you want. Say you want to see the difference between a mouse and a monkey, you can add these in as well, and choose your starting doses and your NOAELs. You can change this back. Or if you just want to see what your human equivalent dose is, you can change that to HED, add a bunch of different species into it, and then you can see what that's going to look like on the other side. You can see the difference between what a human equivalent dose is and then what it is after the fact of a safety factor being applied. So this is a pretty good tool. Bookmark it, send it along. And if you want more content like this, check out my course, The Complete Guide to Non-Clinical Development. There's 12 plus modules plus 2 bonus modules, 3 tiers for your experience. The link is in the comments.